follow that mediation process organised by the CCMA at SAA's request tomorrow. Now, President Cyril Ramaphosa is speaking about this as well. We promised you that interview. He's also affirmed the centrality of multilateralism and an open, free and fair international trade system as key outcomes of the talks of BRICS countries meeting in Brazil. Ramaphosa endorsed the Brasilia Declaration along with his counterparts from Brazil, Russia, India and China, and also held bilateral discussions with all leaders of the group. In a broad-ranging interview with the SABC's Sherwin Bryce-Pease, he also extended his condolences to the family of the AmaXhosa King Sigcawu and the people of the Eastern Cape, and weighed in on the latest difficulties facing SAA. Let's take a look.
The President of the Republic has been on the ground in Brasilia, Brazil for the last 3 days. He speaks to us now at the conclusion of the 11th BRICS Summit, the 5-member BRICS Summit here in Brasilia. Mr. President, always a pleasure. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
You're welcome.
So, what have been the real tangible achievements of this BRICS Summit, in your view?
Well, maybe before I even begin to outline them, I think I'd like to start off by sending our condolences to the family of the Sigcawu royal family in South Africa in the Eastern Cape with the passing of King Zwelonke Sigcawu. It's a really sad loss for us. It was unexpected, and the people of the Eastern Cape, and indeed the whole nation, is in sadness and in mourning over his passing. So I pass my condolences to the royal family and all the people of the Eastern Cape. In relation to the outcomes of the summit, this BRICS summits are always very special. Special because in the first place they bring together the leaders of the 5 key countries that represent close on to 3 billion people on earth, and who come together once a year to have a summit to renew their own sort of contact amongst themselves as leaders, but also amongst the peoples of these 5 key countries. And in this regard, what I would call some of the key outcomes is just to ensure that we remain committed to a multilateral system that is strong, where we do not support just one nation and one country being the one country that determines what should happen in the world. We all, 5 of us, believe in a multilateral system that is properly governed, where all nations in the world are treated as equals. So we were able to reconfirm that, but we were also able to reconfirm the key role that we should all play to promote trade, so that world trade is promoted and continues to grow, because some of the key countries like China and India and indeed Russia play a key role, and we do play our key role on the African continent as well. And Brazil plays a key role in Latin America. So all 5 countries are key industrial powers and giants, some more globally, some in their own space. And we reconfirmed that we need to continue playing a key role in the growth of the economy of the world and the economies of the areas where we operate in.
So I would agree with you, Mr. President, based on the Brasilia Declaration, that the big takeaways were this recommitment to multilateralism, upholding the centrality of the United Nations, the importance of open markets, the non-discriminatory nature of trade and fair competition. The United States was not mentioned in this declaration, but it sounded like you were talking about them. Did the US come up in your private conversations?
Well, the US is a key player. It's the biggest economy in the world, and in various private conversations, it will always come up. It is the elephant in the room, and you can't but talk also about the elephant in the room. And some of the key messages that we are beaming out is that we would like a multilateral system where all players in the economy of the world treat each other as equals, where we are able to trade with each other, where we are able to cooperate with each other, And that is a very sort of soft type of messaging that we are putting out to all key players without singling out one country in the world.
My follow-up was going to be, how do you actually achieve that, right? You talk about soft messaging,
yes,
but how do you actually implement this desire to see a fair, equitable global trading system given the man you have in the White House today?
Well, you see, what we are able to do is to actually have that key principle position that we put out, and also reinforce it through our bilateral relations with various countries in the world. And all of us deal with many other countries. Some of the countries in the BRICS are members of the G20, so we are able to deal with those. Some of us attend the G7, and we are able to interact with various countries and propagate this type of message, because it's really a principled position which is based on prosper thy neighbor as you also want to prosper.
But and yet, Mr. President, BRICS was seen as kind of the alternative to this global hegemony that you are now encountering again as the BRICS Forum itself. Is BRICS living up to its expectations? Is it a counterpoint, or is it nice words on paper that actually don't mean much?
Well, BRICS is quite a unique collection of countries, and we are living up to the expectations that we had, and we've gone much beyond what other sort of associations have done in the past. We've been able to form other institutions. For instance, we formed the New Development Bank, and the New Development Bank has started operating, and it's got a strong capital base. It's already got projects in all the BRICS countries. In our own country, it's laying out $2.5 billion to support various projects that we have, and it is also going to go beyond the BRICS countries and support a number of other projects in other countries. And in our case, we are supporting that they should support projects in various African countries.
But the bulk, though, Mr. President, of the $12 billion loan book has not gone to South Africa. It has gone to India and China. Does that concern you?
No, we've already got $2.5 billion. And with that, there are projects that we are going to be able to support. And the bank has allocated $2.5 billion for South Africa to support a number of projects. That is not small, considering the fact that we are the smallest member of the BRICS countries. To be able to have garnered up to $2.5 billion is quite an achievement. And we are going to put that money to very good use. And of course, some of the money has to go to the other members of the BRICS family, as in China and so forth. And you must remember that we contributed the least.
Right.
And having contributed the least, we are gaining much more than what we contributed. So that, I must say...
Are you satisfied with the least?
Is a very good position to be in. We contributed the least because of our size, and that in itself speaks volumes of what we can gain out of the bank, because we're now going to gain much more than what we have contributed, and that is a great strength for us.
Your Minister of International Relations earlier this week, Dr. Naledi Pandor, made the call at the Foreign Ministers segment of BRICS that BRICS basically use its collective political and economic weight to impose or to see to enact the changes that we seek. For example, the reform of the United Nations and multilateral institutions, the reform of the Security Council, for example. Do you see China and Russia, two permanent members of that council, as honest brokers when it comes to the reform? I know, for example, that China, though, will pay lip service to the reform, but really behind closed doors is not really eager to see that reform happen. That affects you directly. How do you see that relationship?
Well, the issue of the reform of the United Nations also came up for discussion, and it is part of our declaration. And we are all united in our belief and in our resolve to have the United Nations system reformed and changed so that it can be more inclusive. There is deep recognition of the fact that there are 1.2 billion people who who are on the African continent who are not represented. So that is a stark reality that the BRICS countries have had to face and deal with. And the recognition has led us to believe that there is a need for that reform to take place. And we are satisfied as South Africa because we are amongst those countries that are leading the charge for the United Nations Security Council or the United Nations system to be reformed, to be much more inclusive.
But my argument to you, Mr. President, is that those that are powerful, the veto-wielding members of that council, do not seek the change in reality that you do.
Well, the process is ongoing. The discussions are
It's 2 decades long.
Yes, it's been 2 decades, and now we're facing a very key moment in the history of the architecture of the United Nations. And having formed this wonderful association with our partners in BRICS that represents 3 billion people on earth, we believe that we've got good partners who understand the ideological orientation as well as the political perspective that we share. So with that, we are well positioned because with them being on our side on a whole range of issues, on this one, we are going to find common ground.
So I think it's going to have to be a follow-up in St. Petersburg on this very question, Mr. President, to see if your enthusiasm and optimism has been borne out. Busi Mabuza, the chair of the South African chapter of the BRICS Business Council, told me yesterday that she was going to present, or certainly she and her colleagues were going to present a pipeline of new deals to the leaders at this summit. Can you share with us any information about new deals? What sectors? What are we getting from BRICS?
Well, the other derivative from the BRICS process is that we've got a business council. And the business council is a unique formation of businesses in all our 5 countries. And they get together as the political leaders or as the heads of state also get together. And they are able to discuss a whole number of issues of improving governance in companies and the economy, but also begin to identify nodes of economic growth. And they've identified a number of projects in infrastructure, in agriculture, in renewable energy, in agro-processing and mining, and a whole range of others that affect the economic lives of the BRICS countries. Yeah. And they've presented their report. We are obviously going to go through that report. And these are projects some of which are bankable.
These are tangible things that can happen, right?
Tangible projects. And the beauty of the BRICS family of nations is that we've got a business council that is business oriented, that wants to see growth, and that wants to see intra-BRICS country trade and economic dealings. And so having come up with these projects, I believe that these are projects that are live, that are implementable, and they are going to make sure that either the New Development Bank or other financial institutions fund these projects so that they gain traction.
So let me ask you about the other elephant in the room, Jair Bolsonaro, the host of this summit. The outreach segment, the BRICS Plus segment of this annual summit was cancelled due to various political machinations in the region. You just had a bilateral with him. This is a climate change skeptic, a homophobe. They call him the Trump of the tropics. He expresses acerbic views of leaders he disagrees with, including China's president. What's your relationship with him? What do you make of him? What are your thoughts, Mr. President?
Well, we've just had a wonderful conversation with President Bolsonaro, and we believe that the strong relations between Brazil and South Africa far outweigh anything that even the leaders may well want to articulate, because it is the bonds between the 2 countries and the partnership that exists between the 2 countries, including the economic relations between our 2 countries, that are of great importance. But apart from that, I found my conversations with President Bolsonaro, my dealings with him, have been underpinned by a warmth that is quite unique in dealings between heads of state. And I've enjoyed having these discussions with him, and the bilateral we had with him was wonderful because we identified a number of areas where Brazil and South Africa can cooperate, where we can unlock a number of nodes or channels for economic growth.
I want to shift very briefly, Mr. President, to domestic issues. The crisis at South African Airways, the strike is going to go ahead. Your thoughts at this time? You're heading back to South Africa now. What will you be doing to avert what could be a catastrophe for the national carrier?
Well, this is a labor relations issue. The management of SAA and the unions have been in discussion, and they have not been able to find one another around issues of wages. Now, this happens all the time in various companies and in various sectors, and I don't believe that we should panic.
But when it rains, it pours, they say.
Well, in labor relations, things do sort of get off the rails from time to time, and it really depends on cool heads. And I'm hoping that there will be cool-headed people on both sides who will be able to settle down, discuss the dispute that they have, and find ways of resolving it.
So are you saying there's no role for government here?
Well, government obviously is the shareholder.
Exactly.
So the shareholder obviously has to play a role in the background while management and the board of directors are in the scrum together with the unions and dealing with all these issues. So the government is not completely de-linked from this process, and we obviously will try to find ways together with management to resolve this dispute. It's a dispute that must be resolved because the company is going under a huge stress itself. And on the other hand, understandably, the workers want a wage increase, and something has got to give. The two have to find one another because they just cannot go on without finding a solution. And a solution is always there somewhere hidden, and they must find it.
Something tells me you have a history in mediation, Mr. President. Final question for you. There's a big South African delegation here in Brasilia. There's a big delegation in New York right now for the SA Tomorrow Investment Conference. Your finance minister, your public enterprises minister. How many seats are available on Nkwanzi to get them home?
Well, we don't have so many seats because most of them are taken. The Nkwanzi is actually quite a small plane. I wish it was a much bigger plane where we could take as many other South Africans as we possibly can. So it's a problem of not having all the resources that we need.
So I think the discussion for a bigger plane is a conversation for another day. Mr. President, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. The President of the Republic of South Africa speaking to us here at the conclusion of the BRICS summit here in Brasilia. He will be flying the presidential jet home. Thank goodness for that.